because, ladies and gentlemen, this is the best place in the world to live, work, and raise a family. And the best is yet to come. May God continue to bless America and our great state of South Carolina. Thank you.
Governor Henry McMaster just a few days ago delivering his annual State of the State address. On the very same day, he made a piece of state history as well, becoming the longest serving governor in state history. I believe it's 2,947 days. Well, there's more now.
There's more now.
Yes. More now, but we're getting you connected to the Capitol again this week. We start with the rosy outlook from the governor concerning the state's economic situation. That has been a hallmark of his time in office, of course, for the past, well, two terms now. And, of course, we've invited our favorite people, Catherine Glenn Foster and Dave Wilson again.
It's good to be with you on
a
Sunday
busy
morning.
week.
It's been a
busy week.
Very busy
Certainly
week.
has.
From state issues to
I
national
think State of the
issues.
State was the most calm issue of the week for sure.
It turns out that it was.
It was. We didn't know if it would be.
Yes.
There wasn't much arguing over it, but we talked about it a week ago, and the blueprint you laid out pretty much was what we got from the governor.
Looking at economic issues, education, all of the things that we expected to see from him.
I mean, his biggest thing from the education standpoint, we've talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is increase in teacher pay. Going up to $50,000 for a starting teacher. That is a significant bump from where we were just a few years ago, where we were hovering around in the 30s. And so now you're at a much higher level, and that allows you to recruit better teachers. It allows you to actually create some level of stability, which is his entree into that's how we start recruiting better businesses and a workforce. And he, he sat there and touted, the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars worth of investment that has come into South Carolina since, well, as he put it, 2017. Well, when he just happened to
slid into office when
right.
former Governor Nikki Haley went up to the United Nations.
Yes.
Right, and that was a big move for Henry McMaster. That set in motion a whole new era. And when it's all said and done, it'll be almost 10 years of Henry McMaster as governor of South Carolina.
When he finishes this term in 2027 is when it's officially, we'll hand over the reins, whoever that next person is, and we'll have plenty to talk about in that in the months ahead, because it can't, officially can't take official shape yet, is not rank and file yet, but we know that they're jockeying for position already, and that'll be a story for another day. But one of the things we also talked about over the last few weeks is the need for energy in South Carolina.
Yes.
And that too goes hand in hand with companies coming here. The demand is there for more power. And that was another part of the address last night for sure.
It was.
Yeah, I mean, really all of these issues are so interconnected too. When you look at the education and bringing up that next generation, and then that the investment that we've seen from companies coming in is helping to fuel the better education, which drives the need for the greater power. So he really issued a strong call for that. He said we must increase our power capabilities here. That's how we're going to continue to be a state of the future.
And that's the place where some of the executives with the power companies are coming back in and they're saying, listen, we don't have the ability to keep up with the capacity needs. You've got some of the power companies down in the low country who are basically telling large-scale producers, manufacturers, we don't have enough power right now to be able to service your needs. And that is going to become a problem for economic development moving forward, which then takes us to VC Summer and all of the debates that are going to go on back and forth.
Which may be reopened and revisited, job.
And so the thing with that is, and this is what they've come back and said, listen, we're putting this out to private bid. So keep in mind, remember back in 2017, VC Summer 2 and 3, the new nuclear reactors that were out there, they basically went defunct. The whole issue.
Thousands of people walked off the job. That was it. Done.
$9.1 billion that went to the taxpayers and the ratepayers. Some of you are both. And so in that particular case, you've now got a situation where, okay, wait a minute, are we going to recoup some of that? Are we going to have some of that money coming back?
Yeah. Now the governor did talk a little bit about. We have a selection from his speech about the need for energy, because like you said, the companies are saying, if you don't do it, we are not coming. So we could listen to the governor's comment on that.
And how will it be produced, and how will it be transmitted? Our electric generation distribution and transmission capacity and capabilities must be able to handle enhanced future economic development, anticipated technological advances, and our population growth, because we are growing fast.
The truth is, our economy can't be as robust as you've described, Governor, since our Finance Committee recently uncovered a $1.8 billion discrepancy in our Treasury.
There's that money again.
Well,
or the monopoly money.
We've been talking about the monopoly money for a while. One of the things that the governor did talk about from that energy standpoint is you've got power monopolies. You've got Dominion, you've got Santee Cooper, you've got Duke Energy. Those are the three major ones that are here in the state. And they are basically coming in and they're saying, listen, we only have so much capacity. We've only got so much to do. But there's so many other power capabilities that are out there. Solar, the small cell nuclear that you're going to be talking about. And those innovations are the things that really, are they going to break out of the closed market that the power companies have and really start opening that up to greater levels of competition? And what does that mean for you, at home? Lower rates, hopefully.
We hope.
Yeah.
We hope.
Yes.
Senator Margie Bright Matthews, we heard from here. She was delivering the Democratic response. Brought it back several times in her response about the $1.8 billion financial fiasco, blunder, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
There again were two sets of hearings this week, both by a Senate panel and a House panel. And let's just say that the treasurer, Curtis Loftus, was grilled. That's putting it nicely.
That's a nice
was
Yes.
grilled.
And then flipped over and stoked a little bit.
Again,
Right.
He stood there and answered their questions. Maybe he didn't answer them. He talked about them. He
Yes.
talked about their questions. We have something from, I believe it was Wednesday, where things got heated and the treasurer fired back. Let's have a listen.
They're sitting around laughing. What in the hell is all this about? Nobody can understand it. It's a political witch hunt and it needs to stop. I don't think y'all are involved. Y'all are at the tail end of this. But we've got to understand, what is the big picture?
Well, the big picture, it would seem, is the state's credit rating, the state's ability to budget out for major projects, because if you think you got $1.8 billion in the bank, you got a lot of things hanging on that.
And the other side of that is that he under oath testified
that it was there.
that it was there. But second of all, that the state made $220 million in interest off of monopoly money.
Imaginary dollars.
And he
Right.
said this under oath.
He did.
So
They reminded him of this.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're in a situation where he's testifying that we made all of this money, millions and millions of dollars, more than $200 million. And that's not possible because there was no money to be made to make it from. It doesn't make sense. And yet here we have a leading state official testifying to this. I will say, though, that if you're going to have a witch hunt, I can't think of much better of a witch hunt than to go seek after your $1.8 billion that's missing. So I would sign up for that one. Hand me a pitchfork.
Yeah.
That's fine with me. And I think we have a lot of state senators and state elected officials and state residents who feel the same way, which
Correct.
makes sense. You look at Margie and her incredible response there, where she just cut right to the core issues. And I really appreciated also that it was her who responded, because as now one of our 2 female senators, down from 6. We used to have 6 female senators, and now we're down to 2. It was so important and so powerful to have a strong Black woman responding to the governor and calling the state to accountability, saying we must actually track this money. We must have accountability across the board on state policy.
If there were ever an issue that both parties were in lockstep on, it is this one.
It is.
It is this one.
And it is a place where it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. The Democrats are going to come back and they're going to say, listen, this is what happens when you have one party control, because the Republicans are basically all the constitutional officers and a supermajority in both chambers. And when that happens, there's a place where the opposition party, and we talked about this with Heather Bauer the other day, the opposition party, sometimes the only thing they can do is blow the whistle, and that's exactly what they're trying to do right now, which is not a bad thing, because you really want to be able to have real discussion and somebody to say, listen, something's not right here, and I'm not necessarily going to walk in lockstep, which is also what we see on the Republican side in the House when the Freedom Caucus decides that they're going to start blowing their whistle over rules changes in the House. If you want to get into really crazy inside baseball, that's the one. That's the one. Right.
You mentioned the House. That what we heard there from Curtis Loftus when he was being questioned by some House members the other day, and Republicans are holding his feet to the fire on this. One of them being Representative Micah Caskey out of Lexington County,
who happens to be his representative.
Who does happen to be represent Curtis Loftus's area. And in what we have here, this soundbite from Rep. Caskey, he says, hey, I voted for you. A lot of people voted for you, and we got some questions. Let's have to listen.
We are spending millions of taxpayer dollars to address a problem that could have been raised by you or your office years ago. And so when those voters went back to the ballot box to elect you for a fourth time, they didn't know. I didn't know, but I voted for you. That you were a part of this. I didn't know.
A lot of people didn't know that Alex Partners' audit showed a lot of people actually did know, or maybe had an inkling of what was going on as far back as 2017.
Yeah.
And so when you look at this, you had Richard Ekstrom, who was the Comptroller General. He resigned. The Inspector General, he's now resigned. That's not an elected official on that particular case, but
State Auditor.
Just
a week ago.
Right.
George Kennedy walked away.
And so who's left?
The Treasurer.
For all of the ire to go to, except for Curtis Loftus, who is the State Treasurer. He's responsible for basically the bank accounts of South Carolina, how the money's invested, how the money is moved, how it is used. The Comptroller General is the check writer, but his responsibility was oversight of that. And, he doesn't really want to turn around and take blame because he'll say, but wait a minute, the books were
what about
coming
these
back.
other guys?
The books were, and there's nobody else left.
Not now.
There's not now because you're the only elected official who has an ability to turn around and say, I used my office, I did these things. And it just isn't happening right now.
The buck stopped with him.
Right.
The real one and the fake one.
Yes.
Exactly. All 1.8 billion of those.
There was some action taken this week, too, and for lack of a better term, a Senate Finance Committee passed a resolution that essentially sets up the mechanism for a babysitter for the Treasurer's office now. That spearheaded by Senator Larry Grooms, who has been spearheading the entire look into these money matters. And Larry, in all of his brilliance, this is what he had to say the other day after that.
That means there's $1.8 billion that's been talked about as special money laying around. Come to find out, there's no money. The Treasurer is not able to keep track of the money in the Treasury.
The word knuckleheads was also used at one point during that hearing
That is a
the other day.
groomism, yes.
It is a groomism. He might want to trademark it now. He's put it on the record in a hearing.
I'm sure it will be somewhere recorded.
But
in the
again,
in the
a
Senate Journal.
babysitter set up for the Treasurer's office essentially is what we have now. Or the money's been allocated to do, or approved to do so when that time comes.
But that really is, I think, a blessing in disguise,
Yeah.
even for the Treasurer's office, because it really sets up that system of checks and balances that our U.S. government and all of our state governments rely upon. We don't have a system of monarchy or kings. We're supposed to have these different branches of government that kind of watch over each other. One is passing the laws, one's enforcing the laws, one's making sure that in fact they are constitutional and that they're fair. And so this is allowing us to ensure that everything is legit and that we don't have this situation happen again. So I think it's almost like cameras on police officers or things like that. Even though it may seem a little bit obtrusive at first and we may not always want to have a babysitter or a minder, nonetheless, when it comes down to it, it protects everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. More to come on that one because the mechanisms are just slowly now taking shape for how they're going to pull themselves out of the muck on this one. Another topic we want to talk about this week, just the other day, on Friday, the state performing its third execution since restarting carrying out death sentences in South Carolina after that 13-year pause when they couldn't get the requisite drugs required to do lethal injection. First of the year I believe in the entire country.
It is.
Yes.
So far, and that will change, of course, in the days to come. There were some questions leading up to the execution of Marion Bowman about potentially his innocence in the case. Some questions about the method of execution as well. It is an interesting case, for sure.
It is, and really there have been significant questions for all three of these executions that the state has carried out since restarting executions. And as you said, this is the very first execution in the entire nation for the year 2025. But the first execution since restarting, we had a witness who recanted his testimony mere days before the execution, explaining that he had been pressured into giving that testimony. The second had completely turned his life around and was really ministering to other folks on death row, including even the staff there.
Yeah.
And then with Marion Bowman, he has maintained his innocence throughout.
Since the beginning.
Since the beginning, and there were questions about effectiveness of counsel. We even had a hearing about that attorney's representation of Marion Bowman, and in that hearing, he just continued with these racially charged statements that shocked the entire courtroom into silence. And so you have to ask yourself at some point, when is it too much? At what point do we say there is a shadow of a doubt about this person's innocence and it is time to stop the killing?
Well, it goes back to what we had with Richard Moore, which was the last execution last year. You know, you have a man who walked into a convenience store. He went in to rob the store. Unarmed. And the person in the store had two guns. They ended up in a scuffle. Both of the men got shot. The store clerk dies. But there was no malice there was no intent.
Walking in.
And that case, with an all-white jury in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and a prosecutor in Trey Gowdy, who becomes a congressman eventually, he wanted to have a death penalty win because he was running for prosecutor there in Spartanburg County. There's got to be a place where we start calling these things into question. And I really call into question why we're not seeing at least a little bit more of questioning by the governor to not give clemency to these folks.
When there are many, many questions.
Right, and we need to be clear here. We're not talking about letting these people back out onto the streets.
No.
There's no question of that, but they can have a full, fulfilling life that is actually adding value to the state and the world from that jail cell just 10, 20 feet down the way off of death row.
Yeah.
And when you have these questions from the local level all the way to the state level and sometimes the federal level, these questions of politicizing executions, politicizing death, you have to ask yourself, is this really justice? And so we need to remember these people. We need to say their names: Freddie Owens, Richard Moore, Marion Bowman. We cannot let them have died in vain. They committed bad acts. I think we can all say, at the very least, they were at the scene for a lot of these things. Don't necessarily need to be on the streets again, but they also don't deserve death when there are so many questions about their innocence and the prosecution of these men.
And that's the place where you have families that are coming in and they're making the argument that, listen, my loved one is gone. And you know, I think for the governor in the last execution with Richard Moore, that was the closing of the door for him to say, I'm going to let justice run its course. The justice system did what it did. The jury did what it did. This was the sentence that came down. And for him, he decided that his job as the chief executive was to execute that particular judicial decision.
But with that said, we also have a system, a Justice Department that is focused on rehabilitation, that is focused on getting people back out to be productive members of society as much as possible. And for the most part, they're doing an excellent job of that. So at this point, why are we turning to punishment, to just retribution, instead of saying, what can we do to We can't right the wrong. We can't bring these people back, and the families have suffered an immeasurable loss. But it doesn't fix that loss to then 2-3 decades later kill someone else.
Well, and to Catherine's point, I think you take a look at what Brian Sterling has done as the head of the Department of Corrections. He has done a phenomenal job.
He has. He absolutely has.
He brings a level of his own empathy. He brings his own faith. He takes this as an opportunity to recognize the fact that the men and women who are serving time are in there for a reason, but they're also in there to be able to eventually, for many of them, to go back out into society. To have the workforce, they're right, to have training, to have job preparedness, to the skills that they need. And this is where you watch the faith community coming in, and they're serving in there too.
Yeah, he has done a good job. I'm glad you made that point.
Yes.
He really has, and reduced recidivism rates for those
Exactly.
that can
Exactly.
be ultimately released. We have one more topic to hit on this week, and it's one we also have addressed in previous weeks, but there's some movement on it. School choice. We know the previous plan in this state was shot down by the state Supreme Court, deemed unconstitutional. However, the Senate took this upon themselves the last couple weeks and were able to get a plan through, at least their chamber, that would then redefine this as lottery funds paying for private school vouchers. And it came on the day when thousands of students and educators marched on the State House Thursday.
Imagine that.
Yes.
Wonder how
Rallying for school choice because it was school choice week.
Right.
Week.
Yes.
Well, the interesting thing about the school choice bill that's out there right now, and it got turned down by the state Supreme Court now twice.
It did.
Because there's a part of our Constitution that says you can't use public dollars for private education. And so in that particular case, along with what's called the Blaine Amendment, which I think you could explain a little bit more, this is a place where they're coming down and they're saying you can't do this. Well, here's the interesting part about the lottery. Lottery dollars actually are set aside in the way that we actually created the lottery. It specifically says it's to be able to be used for educational purposes. So
it's very vague.
It's
gray area.
vague.
Yes.
It's vague, but at the same time, Brian, there's not an adjective before education. It doesn't say K through 12. It doesn't say early childhood. It doesn't say post-secondary. It doesn't say college or universities. It just says education. And so you've got competing things that are going on right now that the courts are going to have to decide, and that can be a very tough thing for the legislature to start creating laws to thread that needle.
We have already heard, of course, a couple of weeks ago from the head of the South Carolina Educational Association that should this bill pass, that they expect to bring another lawsuit. So I expect this to go back to the South Carolina Supreme Court. But there are a lot of really important questions to be asked here about how we're using state dollars and what counts exactly as a state dollar. When we're using it already, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, when we're using it already for the pre-K and for college, for university level education, and then there's this gap K through 12. How do we perhaps right that wrong? Does the Supreme Court or the legislature need to go in and say, well, actually it's the bookends are also unconstitutional, or do they make it all equal? How do we fix this so that every South Carolina child has the access to education that they need, and that personalized education that's going to be best for them, while still remaining on the right side of the Constitution?
Absolutely.
And
I'll give you
that's
the
where-
last word because it has to go to the House still.
The Senate spent 2 weeks on this, and they were going back and forth, and they actually had a very hearty debate on Thursday afternoon about what is and is not constitutional, what else could be done. It could actually turn around and go to a vote if an amendment to the Constitution was presented and passed by both chambers. But that's for another day.
It is.
The thing that we're looking at now is the Senate has had a second reading. There are 3 readings of every bill. When it crosses the desk, then they have a discussion and they vote, and then they have a third vote on that. So they've had the second vote on that. Now they'll have the third one Tuesday when they come back.
But that's just procedural.
It's
going to
functioning.
happen. Yeah.
But it now has to cross over to the House. And when you start tying lottery dollars to that, there's a lot of heartburn that exists, especially among the speaker, especially among a lot of folks, that there's a lot of angst that's out there right now as to whether or not we want to start using lottery dollars to be able to do that.
Yeah. So another hurry up and wait situation.
Yeah.
Just like the $1.8 billion mystery that I think we'll be talking about next week.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think we will be.
Yes.
There'll be another set of
We're not
hearings, I'm
trying
sure.
to do
These aren't
Groundhog Day here,
No,
but
it's starting to feel
it's
that way.
starting
though.
to feel that way.
The $1.8
feel
billion
that
show.
That's right, exactly.
But Bill Murray for Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
See, wait,
Groundhog Day's coming.
it is, and we'll talk about it again.
Yes, we
Right
will.
here.
Yes, we will. With new material slightly. But thank you again, Dave. Thank you, Catherine. We're going to do it again next week. We'll get you connected to the Capitol again next Sunday.